Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm going to show you how to make a luminary card. And it's a very simple and clean design, but the fun part is with the vellum. If you put a battery operated tea light inside of it, you get this nice illumination of the scene. And I really love how it even illuminates the windows in the buildings. So these are the dies that I'm using. I actually don't end up using this poinsettia die. I'm using a Santa and sleigh die. This one here is the one that I've had for years, and I believe it's probably just continued, but I'll link something similar below. And then I'm also using a town scene die. So I'm going to die cut all of my pieces. The Santa and sleigh I do out of black, and then the rest of them are all done with white. Now this particular town scene, you want to take all the windows out of it so that you can see the vellum right through it. And I have some gold vellum that I like to use for this because it gives a nice glow. I also have some gold vellum that I put some double-sided strong adhesive behind, and I'm going to later on use a circle die cut and cut a circle out of it for the moon. So what you see me doing here is using some strong double-sided adhesive, and I'm just putting it above and below each one of the windows so that I can put some gold vellum behind it. Now you'll notice as I'm doing this, I don't make sure that it's nice and neat because I'll show you in a minute how we're going to hide it. What I want to make sure is that all of the window openings are completely covered and that I don't extend the vellum past the building. So some of these buildings have little spaces between each one of them, and I don't want to go past the roof or below. And by doing the strong adhesive, it makes it nice and quick and easy to put this vellum behind there. Vellum itself doesn't really like liquid in any form, so this is not a great place to use a liquid adhesive. If you happen to have a bottle that you can get a really fine minimal amount, it might tolerate it a little bit more, but I just find a strong double-sided adhesive. This particular one is about 1/8 of an inch wide, works perfectly for what I'm doing here. So I've got all of my windows covered with that gold vellum, and what I did was cut a second one of this village scene, and I'm just going to take a tiny little bit of distress collage medium and glue it together. Now I tried to make sure that that collage medium was where there was going to be two pieces of cardstock hitting each other and not touching the vellum. So I'm taking a piece of 8.5 by 11 cardstock, and I cut it to 5.5 inches so that it's 11 inches by 5.5 inches. And then along the long side, I scored it at 4.25 and also at 8.5, so that when this is completely folded, it makes an A2 size card, which is 4.25 by 5.5. But that strip at the bottom is going to be the base of the card, and we're going to put a ledge on it to catch the edge of the card so that it stands nicely, and you can put that battery operated tea light in there. So in order to cut that rectangle out of the front of the card, I'm taking a rectangle die, and I just like to eyeball it to make it centered. If you feel more comfortable, you could take a ruler and you could measure it to make sure that everything is completely centered, but I'm usually fine with just eyeballing it. I do like to take some temporary tape and tape it in place so that it doesn't move on me when I put it through my die cutting machine. So I just have some die tape on there that's going to keep it exactly where I want it to be. And it cuts a beautiful rectangle out of the front. I have another piece of cardstock here that is 4.25 by 5.5, so it's the same size as the front of my card. And I'm putting that same rectangle die and cutting that rectangle out of it to create a frame. And this way, any of these die cut pieces, the edges of the vellum, that stuff, is all going to be enclosed between those two pieces of cardstock, and we're not going to have anything showing in the inside of the card. It's just going to have a neater finish. So I took some distress collage medium and just put along the die cut, the town die cut at the bottom, just to glue it to the bottom of the frame. And now I'm taking some strong double-sided adhesive and going all the way around the frame in order to glue my piece of vellum in there. The piece of vellum that I have is really quite thick and a little bit more opaque, but you can choose whatever thickness you like for what you're doing. The main thing here is we want to have that transparency so that you can see the light from the battery operated tea light. So once the vellum's in there, I put that same strong double-sided adhesive around all of the edges, and I'm going to glue that frame to the front of the card, making sure to line everything up before I press it down because you can't remove this once it is stuck to it. I like to take just a touch of Distress Collage Medium, put it at the top of those die cuts so that that will glue onto the vellum. And then I take an acrylic block to hold it down so that that vellum doesn't warp while it's drying. While we're waiting for that to dry, I'm going to add some accents to my Santa and Sleigh die cut. And I like to do that with using some gel pens. I have a gold gel pen and I have a clear sparkly one. So for the gold one, I'm just putting lines at the top of the sleigh and on the little runners or whatever those are called at the bottom of the sleigh. And I also like to put it on the little reins for the reindeer. Now I actually have 4 reindeer on here and I want to cut it down to 3, so you'll see me trim it down in a minute. Personally, I just prefer to have an odd number. Personal choice. If you like all of them, or if the die cut that you're using has more, totally fine. Just do whatever you like. After the gold is down, I take the sparkly pen and I just use it to color the horns of the antlers, sorry, of the reindeer, just to give it a little bit of a different texture, and that way that die cut isn't completely totally black. It also ties in the gold vellum in the moon and in the windows. So I put that strong double-sided adhesive that I've been using on the back of each of the reindeer and on the Santa and Sleigh. Just put it on the bodies and that was enough. Here I'm taking a look to see if I can use those poinsettia die cuts that I'd created, and I just found it wasn't necessary and it was a little bit too much. So to create the ledge on the inside of the card, I'm taking some of my scrap cardstock. I cut it to 5.5, which is the width of the card, and I'm cutting these strips to be about 3/8 of an inch. I want them to be a little bit wider than 1/4 inch, but I don't want them to be too wide. So I've got 3 of them. I'm building them up just to create a nice ledge in there. And you'll find that by doing this, you'll have a card that sits up a little bit better because it's got something to prop up against. So here is our completed clean and simple card. You'll see it with the lights off in a moment. I've got all the supplies that I use linked below in the YouTube description. And if you're new to die cutting and using a die cutting machine, I've got a whole playlist just on how to use a Big Shot with different dies and embossing folders. Thank you so much for joining me. Have a fabulous day.